Today, we're moving on from the religions of the West, talking about Asian religions, starting with Hinduism. What is Hinduism? It is the cumulative theistic religious tradition of this part of the world, the Indian subcontinent. So, this is Asia. This is what we call South Asia, the South Indian subcontinent, which includes all of these countries: Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. I do my own work in this part of the world here. I lived here for almost 5 years, working in Sri Lanka and India. So I'm actually a historian of pre-modern Buddhism and Hinduism. So I study how Hindus and Buddhists influenced each other, exchanged ideas in this part of the world. Not all Hindus believe the same thing. Hinduism is a cumulative religious tradition with different texts and different commentaries over the millennia, building on the ones that came before. So some texts are regarded as authoritative and sacred by some Hindus, but not by others. Vaishnava Hindus, or Hindus who treat Vishnu as the supreme god, might call the Bhagavad Gita the Hindu Bible, but Shaivite Hindus, or Hindus who say that Shiva is the supreme god, would not necessarily agree with them. There are other texts that they regard as more important. And it's important to keep in mind that the word Hindu was originally a geographical, not a religious designation. It referred to everyone on this side to the east of the Indus River. So the people over here in this part of the world, namely the Greeks and the Persians, referred to everyone over here as the Indus people, the people who live over here on this side of the river. So without any one single Bible or canonical book, without any pope or central religious authority, or without any one institution that all Hindus belong to, Hinduism has taken many various forms over the millennia. Hinduism today is a global religion. There are over 1 billion Hindus in the world, mostly in India, but elsewhere too. There are 1.5 million Hindus in the US, with one of the largest Hindu temples in the US located in Atlanta, the Sri Swami Narayan Mandir. Our earliest Hindu texts date back to the Aryan people, a people who immigrated from what's now the area of Iran over to India about 3,500 years ago. They spoke a language called Sanskrit, not Sanskrit, Sanskrit, and called themselves Aryans, the Arya people, which means Arya means noble people in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is classified as an Indo-European language, so in fact, all of the languages of Europe, North India, and many of the languages in between are derived from a common ancestor, people who lived in what's now the Georgia region of southern Russia and who started to immigrate out about 6,000 years ago. So even English is related to Sanskrit and Hindi in the languages of modern India. And if you set them down side by side, you find many words that look similar across these languages, which is not an accident because they all came originally from one language, which no one speaks anymore, but which we refer to as Proto-Indo-European, or the early Indo-European language that these original settlers spoke. The sacred texts of the Aryan Sanskrit-speaking people were called the Vedas. There are 4 Vedas. The Rig Veda is the oldest of these. You had a few selections from the Rig Veda for the very first class session when you were comparing the Vedic hymn to creation to the book of Genesis in the Bible. And the Vedic texts weren't actually written down, but were memorized in their entirety by people whose job it was to memorize them and then recite them at public ritual occasions, and who were paid for doing so. So these are the Brahmins. The Vedic society worked on the basis of a caste system. So you do whatever job your parents did. So you're born into a certain caste. There's the Brahmin, or the priestly caste, the Kshatriyan, or the warrior caste, the middle class merchants and white collar people, the Vaishyas, and then there's the manual labor caste, or the Shudras, the 4 castes. And your job as a Brahmin was to learn the Veda, the one of the 4 Vedas that your dad knew, memorize it exactly, syllable for syllable, tone for tone, and then to recite it at ritual occasions. So sometimes um, a person from a village would hire Brahmins to perform an elaborate ritual. This is from a 1975 documentary where they did this 18-day ritual called the Agni Chayana ritual, or the building an altar to the fire god Agni, so that Agni could fly the offerings that are poured into the fire up to the other gods, and ask them for blessings in return, ask them to come down to the earthly world and pay back the favor for the sacrifices that were made to them. You might think that memorizing a text is a bad way to preserve it, that why don't you just write it down? If you memorize it, aren't you going to forget parts of it? Isn't the text going to be corrupted over time? You might think this, but it turns out that in the late 1800s, when the first person to make a print edition of the Vedas, he was a German linguist named Max Muller, went to India to ask Brahmins from 3 different cities in 3 parts of India to recite the Rig Veda to him. So he found Brahmins in Chennai, Calcutta, Mumbai. They all recited this Veda to him exactly the same way, syllable for syllable, word for word, with the implication being that when you learn something at a very young age, such that it becomes basically a matter of muscle memory, literally muscle memory. So you're moving your body in a certain way as you recite each syllable, then you have a much lower chance of misremembering a text. Even Brahmin kids learn the way to recite a text before they even know the meaning of the words. So if you learn it as a matter of muscle memory, you're less likely to replace a word that has a similar meaning with another word, which is easy to do if you have a general idea of the complete meaning of the text, with the end result being that the Vedas were actually preserved more precisely than other later Sanskrit texts that were transmitted through manuscripts or written hand-copied documents. The recitation of the Vedas by Brahmins had 2 basic functions. One was as a kind of communion with the gods, offering things into a fire, whether it was animal sacrifices, putting cooked food or plants into the fire, inviting the gods down to partake of this meal, to commune with the gods, and ask them for specific favors, boons. So you could ask them for more cattle for your herd, or that a son be born to your wife. This was the quid pro quo kind of ritual aspect to the Vedas, and how Brahmin priests made their money also, because people would pay them to perform these rituals. The other function of the Vedas was the daily prescribed activity that all Brahmins did, their daily tending of the fire, and Brahmins were expected to keep a fire burning in their home at all times in order to perform these rituals daily, which were believed to ensure that the natural world functioned smoothly, that the rains came on time, even that the sun rose every day. So when looking out on the horizon at night, we're talking about 4,000 years ago, what do people see? Oh, they saw a bunch of campfires out there. And so you look out and you see campfires scattered all across the horizon. And in the imagination of the Vedic people, they thought that when the sun went down below the horizon at night each day, it shattered into thousands of pieces. So when they looked out there and they saw the campfires, they imagined that the sun was shattering into 1,000 pieces at night, and that a prescribed set of recitations from the Vedas were necessary to reconstitute the sun such that it would rise on the other side the next day. The word for cosmic order, which had to be regulated through Vedic ritual in Sanskrit, was rita, which is cognate with English right and German Reich. And if this reminds you of the function of the fire rituals of the early Zoroastrians that I talked about in week 1 of class, you're onto something, because in fact, the Zoroastrians and the Vedic Hindu people are descended from the same ancestors. Basically, the Vedic people who came from Iran to India were early Zoroastrians. So whereas Zoroastrianism would develop into prophetic monotheism in the West, Vedic Hinduism would develop into polytheistic Hinduism in India. But the very oldest origins of both of the religions are essentially the same. A kind of sacrificial fire religion in which it was believed that certain rituals had to be performed to keep the natural order of the world functioning smoothly. The fire as the ritual center of Vedic religious life goes on in later Hinduism to have special significance. So early Hindus, Vedic Hindus, believed that just as there is this fire through which we can commune with the gods, an actual fire tended by Brahmins, each of us within our own body, in our stomach, has a kind of chemical internal fire that cooks our food again when we eat it. This is, they believed, why our bodies are hot and why bodies go cold after we die. So they thought that your body heat was generated by this second fire in your body that cooks your food. They called it tapas, not this kind of tapas, but like an actual source of heat inside your body that provides your body heat and that goes out when you die. And in later Hinduism, when the idea of karma develops, and tapas, it is, for those of you that do yoga, it's your third chakra, your Manipura chakra, the chakra in your stomach. And they believe that by performing yoga, you can kindle this fire, make it hotter, and that this is actually how you burn off bad karma. So people who do yogic austerities, who go out in the woods and do bodily contortion, who do meditation, can literally make their inner fire hotter and can burn off bad karma and get them out of the cycle of rebirth faster. So although later Hinduism looks very different from early Vedic Hinduism in many respects, this whole idea of the central importance of fire is still there, not in the external ritual fire, but in the inner personal fire. The Vedas themselves, their actual content, are these Sanskrit poems that tell stories about the gods, stories of divine marriage and warfare and drama. There are a great number of gods mentioned in the Vedas, but the earliest Vedas certainly don't elevate any one god in terms of importance or temporal primacy over the others. And this was something that you saw in your reading for the first week, when the Rig Veda is ambiguous as to who the creator god actually is. It doesn't want to single out the name of any one god as being the first god or the creator god. The Vedas consist in these hymns to the major deities of the Vedic pantheon: Agni, the god of fire; Soma, who's the god of this kind of psychoactive drink; Brahaspati, the patron god of priests; whole bunch of gods, all of whom have hymns devoted to them, but none of which come off seeming more special or important necessarily than the others. As Hinduism develops after the Vedas, three gods start to emerge as the most important deities, the ones whom you should go to worship first, the ones who have the biggest temples built in their names. And the later Sanskrit Puranas tell stories about how, oh, well, actually, Vishnu is the supreme god. Oh, actually, Shiva is the supreme god. Oh, actually, Brahma is the supreme god. So Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma emerge as the three gods of the Hindu trinity of later Hinduism. Often Brahma is presented as the creator of the world, Vishnu as the maintainer of the world, who comes in to intervene, help out humankind when we're in trouble, and Shiva is going to be the destroyer of the world at the end of time before Brahma recreates it anew. The three of them are referred to as the Hindu Trinity, or the Trimurti. In the later Vedas and Vedic commentaries, Brahma starts to win out as the most important god and the creator god. By the time of the earliest Hindu philosophical texts, the Upanishads, which date to the mid-first millennium BCE, Hindu theologians begin to speak not of Brahma, the name of the male god who is the creator of the heavens and the earth, but of Brahman, here a Sanskrit neuter noun, Brahman, or the mind of God. The mind of God which pervades all things, including us, and which all conscious beings participate in some sense. Brahman is tad ekam, that one thing that is there at the very beginning of time, described in the hymn to creation in the Rig Veda. These Hindu texts explain that God lives in us in the form of our Atman, or our individual soul. Every conscious being has one, with the identity of the mind of God, with the individual soul of each conscious being serving as what I call the central theological mystery of the Upanishads. Similarly, the doctrine of the Trinity is the central theological mystery of Christianity. What does it mean that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are one person? Just so the Upanishads are at pains to explain what they actually mean, that Brahman, the mind of God, is equivalent to the individual soul. They speak of Brahma as being the string which passes like a thread through the universe. They speak of Brahman, the mind of God, being like salt dissolved in water, with the implication being that God resides in all of us. All of us are sentient beings. God resides within us. In some sense, the Upanishads don't make it clear exactly what this means, but that's what they say. This is the significance of the Hindu greeting namaste, which means respect to you, reverence to you, obeisance to you, prostrating yourself before the divinity which exists in the person you're greeting. Atithi Devo Bhava, or guest is God, is the motto of Incredible India, the Indian tourist board's campaign presently to get people to come to India. So Atithi Devo Bhava, treating the guest like they are a god. Not all Hindus explain the relationship between the Atman and the Brahman in exactly the same way. Shaiva, or Hindus who follow Shiva, say that everyone has an individual soul which is separate from God, but the same in essence with God. So everyone has a divine immortal soul, a divine immortal Atman, which Shiva helps us realize our identity with. He helps us break through our deluded fixation on our physical body as our source of self, to realize that our immortal soul is who we truly are. Hindus who treat Vishnu as the supreme God depict all of the physical world around us that we see as being a projection of the dream of Vishnu. Ultimate reality, according to Vaishnavites, is in fact Vishnu's dream, which is projected into the physical reality that we all experience by Brahma, thus making our identity with God realized through the fact that we're all characters within his dream. Waking up to this fact of ultimate reality is breaking out of the delusion, maya is the Sanskrit word, delusion in which we see ourselves as independent from Vishnu's mind. But when in fact at the highest level of realization, we understand that we are contained within him as he is contained within us. There is, of course, a problem amid all of this. How is it that if I am God, I am trapped in my finite mortal body? If God is a perfect and omniscient being, how could I be identical with him? I'm definitely not perfect. I'm definitely not omniscient. What is the relationship of my physical body to my true, immaterial, eternal Atman? Hindus do all agree that the soul of each individual, upon death, departs their body to be reinfused in the body of a newborn being. This can be another life as a human being, but it can be any sentient creature. It can be a celestial being, a deva, a demigod. There are hells in Hinduism. You can be reborn in a hell, or you can be reborn as a ghoul or a ghost or a demon, and you can be reborn as any variety of animal as well. In Jainism, which is a breakaway religion from Hinduism, they even believe that plants have consciousness and that you can be reborn as a plant. And this is why the most serious Jains won't even pick fruit off of a tree. They wait for the fruit to fall down before they eat it, because they think that by even picking fruit off a tree, you're doing harm to another living being. And so, although not all Hindus believe in the specifics of what it means for the Atman, the individual soul, to be identical with Brahman, or the mind of God, or the cosmic soul, they do believe that there is an immortal, non-material aspect to our consciousness that passes from body to body for an indefinite period of time, an indefinite number of lifetimes. And so all Hindus believe that there is in the end some possibility of putting an end to this cycle of rebirth your soul passing from one body to another, the cycle of rebirth being known as samsara, or the wheel of life and death, with release from samsara resulting in the final realization of one's own divine essence. So for South Indian Shaivites, this is one's own Shiva-like immortal, omniscient being. For Vaishnavites, it is one's identity with the mind of God itself. And just so, all Hindus, despite their theological differences, believe that there are various paths to release from the cycle of rebirth, what's known as moksha. Moksha means release. So this is the final goal, the final realization of one's inner divinity. And there are different paths or different methods to obtaining freedom from the cycle of rebirth, which are prescribed for different people, for people with different personalities, for people of different levels of religious attainment, depending on how far along they are. So if one becomes spiritually advanced in a previous lifetime, that's going to carry over into future lifetimes. The three paths, according to the Bhagavad Gita, about which I'll say more in a second, are the path of knowledge. This is the austere philosophical path for people who are advanced meditators and yogis and willing to give up their household life or their life of having a family and experiencing physical pleasure and earning money, and are ready to go off into the woods, into the ashram, and contemplate the nature of their being. There is the path of action, or the path of karma yoga, which allows one to gradually move up through successive births by accumulating good karma until one essentially graduates out of samsara. And lastly, there's the path of bhakti, or devotion, dedicating all of one's daily activities selflessly to a god or a goddess, with the expectation that release from the cycle of rebirth is a gift from that deity, granted as a result of one's selfless devotion. The majority of Hindus in India, over 2/3, are Vaishnavas, or they are those who believe that Vishnu is the supreme god. Vishnu comes to earth 10 times each series of world ages in order to assist humankind. His 7th and 8th incarnations, his births as Rama and Krishna, are the subjects of the two famed Sanskrit Hindu epics, the Ramayana, featuring Vishnu as King Rama, and the Mahabharata, featuring Vishnu as Krishna, the charioteer of Arjuna, one of the 5 Pandava brothers, or the 5 good guy brothers in this epic. I'll leave in the description below a 10-minute summary of the Ramayana for those interested. My own work actually deals with how Buddhists in Sri Lanka have interpreted the Ramayana and kind of flipped it around to make the bad guy, the demon Ravana, out to be the good guy of the story. So that's actually what I work on personally. What we're going to focus on today is the Mahabharata, because it contains a short section known as the Bhagavad Gita, sometimes called the Hindu Bible, and this is the focus of your homework for today.
The Mahabharata is the second of the 2 epics. It's really long, so this is the complete Sanskrit version of the Mahabharata. If you look at it in the library, it consists in 75,000 verses. It's 10 times longer than Homer's Odyssey, or longer than the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare combined. And this is in large part because it has all of these sub-stories and sub-frames that don't relate directly to the narrative at hand, but which represent an index of important events relating to Hindu mythology. And the plot of this epic is the story of 2 brothers who are kings, the blind king Dhritarashtra, who is the elder brother of Pandu. And since Dhritarashtra was blind, he was passed over for royal succession in favor of his younger brother, but then took over the kingdom of Hastinapura when Pandu subsequently renounced the throne. But because both of the brothers had a claim to the throne, their children, the 5 sons of Pandu, the Pandavas, and the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, the Kauravas, competed amongst themselves for control of the kingdom. The Pandavas, the 5 brothers, are essentially the good guys of the story. Krishna here, the incarnation of Vishnu, is on their side. He is the chariot driver of Arjuna, who's one of the 5 Pandava brothers. The Pandavas are, of course, not completely perfect. Yudhishthira, the oldest of them, has one major flaw, that he is a gambling addict, essentially, and he ends up gambling away the kingdom to his cousins led by Duryodhana. He even gambles away their wife, Draupadi, and the end result is that the five Pandava brothers are banished for 12 years, and then they have this probationary year where they're allowed to come back, but they can't be seen by anybody. So they're banished. They're basically exiled for 13 years. The culmination of this is a great battle wherein the Pandavas retake the kingdom from their cousins. So here again is a short, very short video summary of the Mahabharata, after which I will return to talk about the Bhagavad Gita.
Great India, then, tells the story of two sets of cousins, the 5 sons of the dead king Pandu, the Pandavas, and the 100 sons of Pandu's brother, blind king Dhritarashtra, the Kauravas, who become bitter rivals and oppose each other in war for possession of the land. The Kauravas had a grotesque, demonic birth. The Pandavas were instead actually fathered by gods, and are assisted throughout the story by divinities and seers, including Vyasa, author of the poem.
What's your poem about?
It's about you.
Me?
Yes. It's the story of your race. How your ancestors were born, how they grew up, how a vast war arose. It's the poetical history of mankind. If you listen carefully, at the end, you'll be someone else.
Oh, I see Duryodhana and all his brothers want to kill you.
They grow up together, but from early onwards, the Kauravas behave viciously towards the Pandavas.
As they get to be 18 or 20 years old, the rivalry becomes more and more intense, till it comes to fighting for who is going to win the hand of the beautiful princess Draupadi. And one of the brothers of the Pandava, Arjuna, wins her. But because their mother unknowingly says, share her between the 5 of you, Draupadi becomes the joint wife of all the 5 Pandava.
We will marry her. All 5 of us.
Yes. In India, we believe that the 5 Pandavas are the 5 senses. And we have a lovely story which says that if the 5 Pandavas are the 5 fingers, the palm is Draupadi, and that is how it becomes a strong fist. But without the palm, the 5 fingers would never be united. In each husband, one sees one quality. The eldest is Yudhishthira. He is the one who is born of righteousness and knowledge. The next is Bhima, the son of the god of wind, supposed to be the strongest in the world. The next is Arjuna, and he is the perfect warrior. The next 2 are twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, the highest forms of knowledge and wisdom. Each one is but a part of a totality. But when they are united, it becomes a complete human nature. And that is how really we think of the Pandava and Draupadi. For millennia.
For your wife.
But I want to be discontented, dissatisfied.
The malice of the Kaurava cousins and their leader Duryodhana comes to a head when they take advantage of the eldest Pandava, Yudhishthira, who now rules the land.
Now, Yudhishthira is otherwise a very virtuous man, but his one weakness is gambling. And he comes knowing that the game will probably be rigged. And over days and days of playing,
I have won.
loses one after another every single possession.
I have won.
Till he finally comes down to owning nothing but himself and his
I
family.
have won. My cards, my moves, my go. I have won. My forest.
He cannot stop. It is like something has possessed him.
I have won. My land. I have won. My kingdom. All that I possess.
And one by one, he plays and loses each brother. And finally, he loses himself and says, I don't have anything else. And Duryodhana, who has wanted Draupadi from the beginning, says, but you can play Draupadi. They once again play, lose once again, and are exiled into the forest for 12 years, somewhere where they cannot be found.
The Pandavas fulfill their part of that bargain, but their opponent Duryodhana is unwilling to restore them a small part of the kingdom even when their exile has expired, and even when their friend, the god Krishna, pleads on their behalf.
Yudhishthira, who does not want to wage war, sends Krishna to the Kauravas saying, I don't want my kingdom. I will take 5 cities or 5 villages or even 5 houses, and I will avoid war. And Duryodhana says, I will not
give 5 villages. I will not give 1 village. I will not give the point of a needle of earth.
Let one thing be certain. You will have your glorious death. If the earth is clamoring for victims, we will see a splendid massacre.
And a third expression of the Supreme Soul is Vishnu, creator and sustainer of worlds, incarnating on earth in various forms throughout the ages to assist us on our way. To many, Buddha was such an incarnation. And in the Mahabharata, the god Vishnu has come down as Krishna, charioteer and friend of the Pandavas, as they faced battle and the horror of killing family and friends.
Arjuna is the commander-in-chief of the Pandavas' army, with Krishna as his charioteer. And they go in to begin the war, and suddenly Arjuna loses confidence in everything that he's about to do. And he falls at Krishna's feet and says, I cannot fight.
Krishna, my legs grow weak. My mouth is dry, my body trembles. My bow slips from my hand. Uncle, cousins, and nephews, and Drona, my teacher, they are all there. I can't bring death to my own family.
And it is then that Krishna turns to him and tells him words that become the Bhagavad Gita, the song of Krishna.
The Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's advice to war leader Arjuna on the eve of battle, is not only the central part of the epic, it is the very core of Indian thought, and as sacred to Hindus as the New Testament is to Christians.
Krishna led Arjuna through the tangled forest of illusion, through all the fibers of his spirit. He showed him the deepest movements of his being, and his true battlefield, where you need neither warriors nor arrows, where each man must fight alone. He taught him how the world unfolds. He spoke for a long time, very long time, between the 2 armies preparing to destroy themselves.
The Bhagavad Gita is a précis of everything that is Hinduism, and basically tells Arjuna of what right action and right thought are.
Right action, called dharma, is the main motive of the Mahabharata.
What is Krishna doing?
He's telling Arjuna that victory and defeat are the same. He's urging him to act, but not to reflect on the fruit of the act. He says to him, seek detachment. Fight without desire.
You say, forget desire, seek detachment. Yet you urge me to battle, to massacre. Your words are ambiguous. I am confused.
Krishna tells him, don't withdraw into solitude. Renunciation is not enough. You must act, yet action mustn't dominate you. In the heart of action, you must remain free from all attachment. You must learn to see with the same eye a mound of earth and a heap of gold, a cow and a sage, a dog and the man who eats the dog. There's another intelligence beyond the mind.
So the Bhagavad Gita, which is sometimes referred to as the Hindu Bible, is in reality a small section of the Mahabharata. It's this scene on the eve of the great battle between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, in which Krishna, Arjuna's charioteer, is trying to convince him to fulfill his dharma as a kshatriyan and to fulfill his family duty to his brothers, to go in and fight valiantly in battle the next day, despite the fact that he knows that he is going to be fighting against his cousins, who are his blood relatives, and many of whom are his friends from an early age. While the Bhagavad Gita, which means the divine song, is, of course, an extremely important Hindu text, it's a slight misnomer to call it the Hindu Bible. It's not equally important to all Hindus, and it's much more important to Vaishnavas than it is to Shaivites. But if the question, what is the Hindu Bible, comes up in pub trivia, the answer is the Bhagavad Gita. So the Gita was an inspirational text for Mahatma Gandhi, who read it every day. It was one of the first so-called sacred books of the East available in translation in English, and was inspirational for American writers like Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Transcendentalists. Robert Oppenheimer, the co-creator of the atomic bomb, after watching the first test, quoted Krishna in the Gita saying, "Behold, I have become death, destroyer of worlds." The text is sometimes referred to as the fifth Veda. It summarizes in Vaishnava theological terms some of the more profound teachings of the Upanishads, and is at its core a treatise on dharma, or social duty, reinforced by notions of classical Hindu theology. Krishna explains to Arjuna that the true nature of the self is the Atman, the immortal soul, and explains to him that wise people, religious adepts, are those who have gone beyond the elementary mistake of confusing the self with a capital S with their material body. It's true that the four Purusha Arthas, or aims of life, from the point of view of classical Hinduism, are dharma, or virtue and social duty, artha, or wealth, material prosperity, kama, or physical pleasure, and finally moksha, or freedom from rebirth. This includes kama and artha as two of the four aims of life. Enjoyment of physical pleasure and the pursuit of wealth are not forbidden in classical Hinduism. They are expected and in some sense necessary for a well-lived life. But Krishna reminds Arjuna that happiness derived from the fulfillment of worldly desires does not last. As one grows old, one realizes that everything is transient: wealth, possessions, health, and even life itself. This is a very Buddhist theme. The Buddhist answer to this, parenthetically, is to just give up your desire for those things, for wealth and possessions and physical pleasure. The Hindu answer, and the answer of the Bhagavad Gita, is the discovery of the self beyond the body, the component of the human being that endures, that is passed on from lifetime to lifetime, transient from one body to another, the immortal Atman, the soul or self, and admonishes that the realization of our own inner divine nature comes not through bodily pleasure, but through the dissociation with the physical body and the gradual dissolution of the ego being the self-centered orientation that one's fate is a product of one's own making, sense of pride in one's accomplishments as one's own, and general orientation in viewing the world as instrumental to one's own purposes, goals, desires, and ends. Krishna explains to Arjuna that there are three paths, optional paths, which one can follow, all of which lead to the dissolution of the ego, and all of which lead to eventual release from the cycle of rebirth, to moksha. The paths here are called yogas, which is a bit confusing for a first-time reader of the Gita, because Krishna doesn't mean here postural yoga, like doing mountain pose or headstands or bodily contortion. Yoga is cognate with the English word yoke. In the case of postural yoga, like you do for exercise, this is yoking the body, mind, and breath together in alignment. In the case of the yogas of the Bhagavad Gita, it means yoking, attaching yourself to a set of religious precepts and practices. Yoga here is better translated as discipline. So the three paths or disciplines, the three yogas that Krishna outlines, are all equally effective, but are recommended for people of different dispositions, people with different personalities. So the path of knowledge, jnana yoga, is suitable for introspective, reflective people, people who are okay spending time by themselves, thinking and doing meditation. This is the path for yogis in ashrams, jnana yoga. For someone who always needs to be doing things, someone who's very active, someone who's very sociable, Krishna recommends karma yoga, the path of action. This is, by the way, the specific path advocated for Arjuna. And finally, the path of devotion, single-minded devotion to a god or goddess such that your every action is imagined as a moment of worship to him or her. What is the relationship between the dissolution of the ego and release from the cycle of rebirth, moksha? The Gita really gives no hard and fast answers here. Krishna explains that consciousness and the immortal aspect of our being is known as Purusha, whereas the body is made of gross matter or Prakriti. Like the subtle secrets of the moment of cosmogenesis, according to the hymn to creation, the Nasadiya Sukta and the Rig Veda, this distinction between Purusha and Prakriti can be comprehended by intense introspection and meditation. Later systems of yoga, including Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, explains that a meditator, through sustained practice, gains awareness over increasingly subtle levels of matter which constitute the body, finally realizing the non-identity of the conscious mind with Prakriti, the material body. At the end of the day, though, there is a deeply mystical dimension to the Gita. All things and all substance, all Purusha and all Prakriti ultimately reside within Krishna, he says. So in chapter 11, Arjuna asks to see Krishna's divine form, his Virata Rupa. Krishna reveals to him all of his divine form at once. He appears with an infinite number of faces, ornamented by heavenly jewels. He displays all of these miracles. He grows himself up to cosmic heights. He shows off all of his amazing weapons. And he says, "Behold, Arjuna, a million divine forms with an infinite variety of color and shape. Behold the entire cosmos turning within my body." So Krishna is Vishnu, and he is, like the God of the Old Testament here, the Alpha and the Omega, that from which all things emanate and that to which all things return. Krishna goes on to suggest that he is the Brahman, or the universal form of consciousness, which resides in each of us in the form of the Atman. I am the same in all beings. I am impartial to all. They who worship me with devotion are in me, and I also in them. Here, Krishna alludes to the path of total devotion, bhakti, the path recommended for the sentimental, the romantic, and for those who tend to engage with others and with the world primarily through emotional connection. Bhakti yoga works to eliminate the ego by dedicating all of your daily actions to the god or goddess to whom you are devoted. Krishna recommends to Arjuna, if he chooses the mode of bhakti yoga, to perform each of his daily duties, no matter how mundane, as if he is doing it as a form of service, seva to Krishna. And seva, service to a god or goddess, is the predominant form of devotional activity in Hindu temples to Krishna and his wife Radha. So seva, or daily service, there means the priests actually changing the clothes of the gods and goddesses daily, feeding them 3 times a day, performing music for their entertainment, that kind of thing. Bhakti yoga in its full form means imagining that the god or the goddess is really physically with you as a part of your daily life. It's a very celebratory and joyous kind of religious disposition to imagine that the god or the goddess is a kind of character that you're interacting with as you would a member of your own family. Karma yoga, the path of action, similarly entails dissociation of any self-directive motives with your daily activity. Krishna here explains to Arjuna that he should perform the duties that are prescribed to him as a member of his caste and as a person of his station. So he's a royal Kshatriyan warrior prince, but to never consider himself to be the singular cause of his own success if he's successful, nor to be preoccupied by failure if he does what's expected of him as a Kshatriyan, but he's not successful. So even if he loses the battle, this isn't the point, according to Krishna. And to do either, to be attached to the outcome of your actions, whether it's success or failure, is to engage in a kind of fallacy of logic wherein you see yourself as the sole agent or determiner of these outcomes. In reality, it's all up to Krishna, right? This is all up to God, whatever the outcome is. The outcome itself is really out of your control. The thing that's in your control is living in accordance with the guidelines of Dharma, the guidelines of social duty as they are outlined in the Dharma Shastras or the law books of classical Hinduism. The utilitarian argument in classical Hinduism for the path of action is that by everyone performing their caste duty as appropriate to them, society functions as an integral unit. So the only way society can function is if priests do their priestly job, warrior kings do their warrior job, their political job, Vaishyas do their middle class jobs, and Shudras do their menial class jobs. And this is a long-standing idea within the tradition, as we'll see later on, even one that Gandhi himself adhered to, which makes karma yoga, the path of action, out to be a traditionalist and really a kind of conservative mode of religious understanding. Those are the three paths. I'd like to comment on what I see finally as the real difficult, vexatious, even morally worrisome aspect to the Gita. So Krishna at one point says to Arjuna that wise people see the same soul in all beings, whether it's a Brahmin, a cow, an elephant, a dog, or the actual word here is dog cooker, swapaka, or a dog cooker. It means an untouchable, someone who's below even level of a Shudra. In other words, the soul of God, divine essence, Brahman and Atman, is equally present in all sentient life, in all people and in all animals. The mind of God is there in Arjuna, it's there in his good guy brothers, but it's also there by implication in his evil cousins, the Kauravas. So how do you know if you're a good guy or a bad guy, or what makes someone a good guy or a bad guy, if everyone has a soul and if everyone's soul is divine by nature? Certainly there are moral rules or precepts outlined in the Dharma Shastras, the law books, and elsewhere, and it's not as if classical Hinduism had a fundamentally different view of what it means to be a good and moral person than we do today. But there are also all sorts of other social expectations, some of which can potentially come into conflict with one another, which is indeed the basic subject matter and plot driving device of both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, conflicts of duty or conflicts of dharma and obligations. So there's basic morality, but there's also caste duty. There's civic duty, your duty as a ruler to your citizens, or your duty as a knight to your feudal lord. There is family duty, certain prescribed duties to members of your family. And there are also certain obligations that you impose upon yourself by making oaths or promises. So this is why Rama and Sita have to leave the kingdom in the Ramayana, because Dasharatha has made this promise to one of his wives that he would grant her any wish. So she wishes that her son be made king and that Rama be banished. And Yudhishthira, in a more frivolous example, promises that he will sign over his kingdom and even his life to his cousins when he loses the dice game. And he loses and he has to uphold this promise. So we have all these the epics. The driving force of the narratives of the epics is negotiating these kinds of conflicts of duty. The subject of the Gita is Krishna telling Arjuna to fight. This is the whole thing. He goes through all these arguments of why Arjuna needs to, the next morning, get up and go fight his cousins. But if, hypothetically, Krishna were on the other side of the battlefield, and one of the Kauravas was having the same crisis of conscience as was Arjuna, what would Krishna tell him? On the basis of everything else he says in the Gita, you would think that Krishna would tell him the same thing, and for the same reasons, that he needs to go out and fight. All of the characters on both sides of the conflict are merely projections of the mind of God, the mind of Vishnu. The Sanskrit word expressing this is Leela, or reality as a kind of divine drama. In this case, this is all happening in the dream of Vishnu as he lies asleep on the cosmic ocean. The point is that Krishna says a lot about yoga and meditation throughout the Gita, but he never admonishes Arjuna to renounce the world, to go out into the woods and become a sannyasi or a yogi. Quite to the contrary, he consistently reminds him of his duty as a warrior, tells him to stand his ground and to go out and fight. So what then is the ultimate teaching of the Gita? What is it telling us to do? Is the highest realization of a learned person beyond the realm of good and evil, beyond good guys and bad guys? I realize that this is a heavy question, but I invite anyone who feels up to it to get it into it on the discussion board. What is the deepest teaching of the Gita, really? It leads me to my favorite passage from the Gita, Yavan Artha Udapane Sarvataha Samplutorike Tavan Sarveshu Vedeshu Brahmanasya Vijanataha. As much value as there is in a well when water is flooding all about, so much value there is in the Vedas for a Brahman who truly knows. So that is, sacred texts are completely useless, right? Sacred texts, law books and sacred texts can tell you all that they want, but the deepest teaching of this text is something that is only knowable through introspection, not something you can learn in books. So I'll look forward to everyone's responses on the discussion board.